All right. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
This
Thank
has
you.
been a busy year for you, I guess.
Yes.
What is the M&A landscape right now, and where do you see it going?
M&A has been going down in volumes, very different types of deals. In other words, some very large transactions and a lot less of smaller transactions than there used to be. I think the second thing in the US is competition on fees. We see large banks coming back to the business and not having enough business to feed their large teams, so fees are going down.
By how much?
For the large banks, I think their thresholds are going down substantially. A large bank would not do a deal at less than $2 million of fees. Now they will do it for $750 of fees.
Oh, okay.
That's a big, big difference.
I know.
So what is left for people like us are the complicated deals, and in a large way, the cross-border deals, because there is less competition on cross-border is more complex. It involves several countries, different techniques. Usually takes a longer time, and so it's almost a specialty in itself now.
What are some of the countries you focus on?
We do a lot of work in Europe, between the US and Europe, and we occasionally do work between the US and Japan. We also have been developing quite a practice with Israel, and that's basically on the back of these, what they call the startup economy there, which means the life sciences and high tech ventures, which have been growing very fast in Israel. Yeah. But Europe,
Well, is that it? Life science, biotech, or any other hot sectors?
For Israel, this is where the action is.
Okay.
There are some other deals. I mean, but the bulk of the transactions in terms of volume or number, if you want, and activity are in life sciences and in telecom, softwares, hardwares. And life sciences is very broad. It's from medical devices all the way to startups in regenerative technologies and biochemicals and biosciences.
Mm-hmm. How many a year, number-wise?
We did this year in our little firm. We're only 15 people. We did 5 transactions this year. 2 of them in Italy. Because Italy is, I called it a Toys R Us for people who look for underpriced assets.
Okay.
Given the continuous crisis there.
In Europe and in that
specifically
country?
In Italy, Spain, we have seen a large number of transactions there. So we did 2 sales of Italian companies. We did 1 sale of a Belgian company. And then we did 2 transactions here. US.
Is there, like you said, cross-border transaction is it's a less competitive market because not everyone can do it.
That's
a lot
right.
of people know, say, America. People know it well. A lot of players in this space, but with other countries, not everybody can do it. What do you think is the most important thing when you do these types of transactions?
Adaptability between cultures, contacts, networks. The markets are less fluid over there than the market is here, and less organized. Approaching the private company is an art, whereas in the States it's more natural,
Yes.
let's say, because all the assets are for sale to some extent,
Yes,
potentially,
yes.
right? The right price and the right terms, but not in Europe. In Europe, there's a lot of pride.
Yes.
There's
I
a
don't
lot of
want you, American, to take my property. I don't want
American
you
or not American. I don't think. Actually, I think Americans are probably at an advantage to buy in Europe. Yes, people have a very, very favorable view of Americans.
to. Compare to whom?
So compared to some of their old enemies in Europe.
I see.
All right. So it may be easier for a U.S. company to buy a French company than for that German company to buy the French company. The old rivalries are still around, right?
I know French people in general, they just don't want to be bought. they would go crazy when they say, oh, I'm losing this company to a non-French entity.
I think there's a lot of pride, nationalistic pride, which is good and bad. The bad part of it is that it's a market and assets are what they are. The tax regime is not so good for French owners to sell. Unlike here, capital gains in the States are 15%. In France,
right, as of now,
it's
yes,
very
yeah.
high. And so people do not like sitting on cash. They prefer having working assets. But the second thing they like, in the States we talk about shareholders, where in most European countries they talk about stakeholders. They don't want just the shareholders, the owners to be happy. They want the employees to be happy. They want the local community to be happy, right? So they want to be able to say, yes, I sold my company or the company I inherited from my family, but employer, the new employer is going to keep employment. The company is now going to be able to export to the States, whereas before it was limited. We are going to get new technologies, and my successors will benefit. So the pride in making sure that the asset remains and remains prosperous.
If, strictly speaking, from a financial perspective, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Pride,
For the
taking
buyer,
care of the community, taking care of the employees.
For the buyer, it's a good thing, in the sense that the price is low, clearly, because there is less freedom about what I, as a buyer, will be able to do with the assets. At the same time, I may get assets of better quality if the employees are loyal to the company, if the IP has remained in the company, and if the regulators or the community around is supportive of the company. So that has usually a positive impact on the assets I'm buying. It's not always the case, by the way. There are tragic
Can
disasters.
You give an example of disaster? I mean, you don't have to name names, but...
Right. Well, I remember a tragic disaster, really, which was that I was selling this French company. And it had trouble, it was distressed, it was the number one in France in its specialty, but it had been mismanaged. This company from Chicago bought it. After a lot of haggling, they got it very, very cheaply. And it was agreed that a number of people had to be let go from the French company. So we went through the exercise and we explained, for that to happen, you have to create a plan, a social plan, which explains who will be let go, what are the terms, how many months, how many years, whatever, and set up a little program for them to be retrained, perhaps in other specialties. And all this will then go to the work inspector, who will bless it, and then you do it. So everything was clear and went very smoothly. And one day I get a call from the CEO of the French company. He says, there's a revolution. So what happens? What's going on? He says, remember the social plan? It's called the social plan. I said, yes. He said, well, they removed our HR person, who was French, and they named an HR person we expected someone from the States. They sent someone from Germany. They said, there is no way a Frenchman is going to be fired by a German. So the whole thing collapsed. There was no way the social plan could be, because there was too much pride. If you were French, you were not going to be fired by a German. I lived in Japan for many years. There was always a feud between the Japanese and the Koreans, which meant that when a Korean company was being run by someone sent from Japan, there were always frictions. Well, it's a bit the same in Europe.
Yeah, between the French and the Germans.
Within Belgium, between the people, the Flemish and the Walloons, right? They speak French and they speak Flemish, and we're not going to work together. It's the same country, right?
Well, last time I checked, yes.
Yes, and in Italy, northern Italians with Sicilians are not going to, or Napolitans are not going to work well together because, I don't trust them.
They say they're Sicilians. They don't tell me they're from Italy. They say I'm from...
That's right. Yeah. That's right. They are Sicilians, right? So don't mix me up with
the rest of the whatever
people who live in a cold climate.
Yes.
Right? and you have to deal with these things every time in a smart way. But the reality is that large US companies find that acquisitions in Europe have been among the most profitable assets worldwide, because it's still several markets, so there is still a lot of imbalance, and
Several markets, you mean several regions, geographic regions?
you don't have the same product in the UK as you have in Spain.
Sure.
And because of that, although one company may have activities in all these countries and can move freely the products from one country to the other, it's probably not the same product exactly. And therefore, there are imperfections in pricing which make those markets profitable.
Where do you see the European activities going?
More money, I think, invested in the disastrous countries of yesterday, which are now coming out of the problem.
So with Spain, Portugal, Italy.
Portugal is very small, but Spain, yes. Italy, yes. Ireland has been doing very well. England has been attracting the largest percentage of foreign direct investment worldwide. In the first 6 months of 2013, the UK attracted something like $75 billion. Right? The US and China were together number two. That's $10 billion less for each, right? And so the UK is seeing money come in from the US, from China, coming from all of continental Europe as well, and has been enjoying that position, which I think will continue. I think the political climate is positive, and the regulatory climate is viewed as more lenient than the one in Germany or in France, which are the other big countries on the continent.
Because I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, UK didn't have so much foreign direct investment before.
This is a large increase. However, the UK has every year consistently been the largest country for US investment in the world. I say more money in the UK coming from the US.
But 75 billion is...
75 billion coming from all over the world is really a large amount of money. You have to think of the new oligarchs, the Russian Federation, Kazakhstan, China, Ukraine, buying assets in the UK as yet another flow of money that did not exist 10 years ago or 15 years ago in some cases. What is interesting also is that within that investment, there is a larger amount of greenfield investments than one would have thought, and that's because, in comparison to France or to Germany, the UK is underdeveloped in terms of infrastructure. There are no fast trains. The only fast trains are one coming from Europe to London, but there are no fast trains yet going up north. Infrastructures in general and energy producing infrastructure has been lagging as well. And these are very good investment areas for long-term sovereign wealth money. So there is a particular attraction of the UK. The legal regime is clearly understood around the world. I think there is a need for diversification in sterling outside of Europe for those who look at Europe. And then there is the fact that you can do very long 20-year investments in infrastructure with good returns.
Like how good are we talking about? Okay, you don't, yeah. Sorry for putting you on the spot.
That is, the reason why it's a complicated question is that when you said that, it immediately triggered the recent investment announced by EDF, the French utility, to develop a nuclear plant in the UK. Right? And there is a controversy about how good the deal they got, right? And the reason for the controversy is that their return is going to depend on their cost structure on one side, but on the other side, it's going to depend on the tariffs agreed to by the UK regulatory
it seems like from what you're telling me, UK, the government clearly gets it, and they have lenient policies. They encourage business activities, especially from foreigners. What can we, the United States do to?
So you're absolutely right. The UK gets it,
Uh-huh.
and that lenient policy and that seduction of foreign money comes from the top and is throughout the UK, throughout the economic players. One of the issues we have in the States is that there are 50 states,
Yes.
and each one plays for their own
Yes.
employment, right? And there is not really a policy at the federal level which can be implemented on behalf of everyone. The only thing that can be done is to present a growth picture which is attractive to the world, and I think that's what Washington is trying to do.
Trying.
Trying
Yeah.
to do, as we all know, it's a bit complicated.
Yes.
The traditional tools are to use the federal budget. The new tool is to use the easing, the quantitative easing. Does it work as well, and is it as permanent as deficits? Is unclear. It looks, though, today in December 2013, the perspective, however, looks positive in the sense that the energy revolution here is attracting by force a lot of new investment in infrastructure, exploration, production, transportation, liquefaction, but also in the industries that take advantage of. So we talked earlier about a Chinese steelmaker interested in steel mill here because
Okay.
gas is so cheap.
Yeah.
We talked about Belgian or German chemical companies that have announced not doing certain investments in Europe and investing here instead because the feedstuff is abundant and much cheaper here. That creates in itself, that framework, if you will, creates a growth pattern which is very attractive worldwide.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.